You are banned from the kitchen next.
When a restaurant owner banned his most talented chef because of her race, he had no idea she was about to cost him everything he'd worked for. What happened next will leave you speechless. In the gleaming kitchen of Le Bernardin Moderne, the most prestigious restaurant in downtown Chicago, steam rises from copper pans, while the sharp rhythm of chopping knives creates an orchestra of culinary precision. The scent of fresh herbs mingles with searing butter as white-coated figures move in choreographed chaos, each focused on perfection. But in the corner, washing dishes with methodical grace, 28-year-old Alicia moves quietly. Almost invisibly, her dark hands scrubbing plates while her keen eyes observe every technique, every seasoning choice, every plating decision happening around her. No one knows that behind those watchful eyes lies 15 years of classical French training. No one even notices when she unconsciously winces at poorly executed sauces or silently corrects knife techniques with her own movements. The head chef, Gregory Matthews, a pompous man with graying temples and an ego larger than his talent, barks orders at his sous chefs, while completely ignoring the woman who could outcook half his brigade with her eyes closed. But when Matthews struggles with a complex molecular gastronomy technique for the evening's tasting menu, desperately trying to perfect a spherification that keeps breaking,
You need to understand
Alicia
the
pauses in
fundamentals
her
before you
dishwashing.
can truly
She
innovate
watches
in the
him
kitchen.
fail, attempt after
I'm here
attempt,
to learn everything.
his face growing redder with each collapsed sphere of passion fruit that should have burst perfectly on the diner's tongue. What they didn't know was that Alicia had pioneered that exact technique 3 years ago at Le Cordon Bleu, where she'd graduated summa cum laude before family circumstances forced her to abandon her dreams. Her fingers itched to show him the precise calcium chloride ratio, the exact timing, the gentle hand needed to create edible pearls that would make diners weep with joy. And with just one whispered suggestion about adjusting the sodium alginate. Concentration? She was about to expose a truth that would shake this kitchen to its very foundation. The molecular sphere Matthews had been butchering for 2 hours required a technique Alicia had mastered years ago, a method that would either save his reputation or reveal hers, because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one. Everyone underestimates. Matthews's face contorts with frustration as another sphere collapses into formless liquid. His hands shake slightly. The tremor of a chef whose reputation hangs on perfection, but whose skills have grown rusty with arrogance. The kitchen staff exchange nervous glances. They know that when Matthews fails, everyone suffers. Alicia steps closer, her dish rag still in hand, water dripping from her dark arms onto the pristine floor. The familiar weight of knowledge burns in her chest, the same feeling she used to get when solving complex flavor equations in culinary school. She'd spent months perfecting spherification, understanding not just the how, but the why, the science behind the magic that transforms liquid into caviar-like bursts of flavor. "Chef," she says softly, her voice barely audible over the kitchen noise. "The sodium alginate needs more time to hydrate. At least 4 hours in the refrigerator." Dead silence. Every knife stops chopping. Every pan stops sizzling. 6 pairs of eyes turn toward the dishwasher, who dared speak to the almighty Gregory Matthews. Matthews's face cycles through surprise, confusion, then settles into cold anger. His pale blue eyes narrow as he looks Alicia up and down, taking in her simple work clothes, her position at the dish pit, her race. A sneer pulls at his lips, the kind of expression that has crushed dreams and silenced voices for centuries. "Did I ask for advice from the help?" he says, his voice dripping with condescension. "Get back to your dishes and leave the cooking to people who actually know what they're doing." But Alicia doesn't move immediately. For just a moment, something flickers in her eyes, not defiance, but recognition. She sees him clearly now, sees the insecurity masked as authority, the mediocrity disguised as expertise. And in that moment of crystal clarity, she makes a decision that will change everything. Before we continue with Alicia's incredible story, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that talent has no color, that skill should be recognized. Regardless of who possesses it, smash that subscribe button right now. This channel is dedicated to sharing stories of justice, of underdogs who rise above discrimination to claim their rightful place. Rate this story from 0-1 to 10 in the comments. But more importantly, share your own experiences. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look? Have you witnessed someone's talent being overlooked due to prejudice? Your stories matter, and this community needs to hear them. Now, let's dive deeper into Alicia's journey and discover how one moment of courage led to a chain of events that would expose the ugly truth about this prestigious restaurant, Alicia. Thompson had worked at Le Bernardin Moderne for 8 months, arriving each morning at 5 a.m. to prep vegetables and departing long after midnight when the last pan was scrubbed to perfection. The wealthy patrons of this Michelin-starred establishment walked past her as if she were part of the kitchen equipment. Visible but irrelevant, necessary but forgettable. But Alicia watched. She always watched. Every sauce reduction, every protein preparation, every plating technique was filed away in her photographic memory. She observed how the current sous chef, Marcus, consistently overcooked the duck breast, how the pastry chef's ganache broke because she rushed the emulsion, how Matthews himself relied on shortcuts that compromised flavor in favor of speed. In her mind, she corrected every mistake, improved every dish, elevated every component to the level of artistry she knew was possible. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was working in one of Chicago's most celebrated restaurants while being treated as if she'd never seen the inside of a kitchen. Matthews and his brigade discussed complex techniques right in front of her, debating the merits of sous vide versus traditional methods, arguing about flavor profiles and molecular gastronomy, never imagining that the woman washing their dishes had formal training that surpassed most of theirs. On that particular Tuesday evening, as the dinner rush approached its peak, Alicia heard something that made her heart skip a beat. Food critic Jonathan Pierce from the Chicago Tribune was dining in the private room, and Matthews was planning to serve his infamous deconstructed bouillabaisse, a dish that sounded impressive, but consistently failed to deliver the complex layers of flavor that made traditional bouillabaisse legendary. "The molecular spherification isn't working," Matthews muttered to his sous chef, sweat beading on his forehead. "The spheres keep breaking before they hit the spoon." Alicia moved closer, her hands still methodically scrubbing a sauté pan. Those words weren't foreign to her. She had spent 3 months at Le Cordon Bleu, perfecting the delicate balance of calcium chloride and sodium alginate needed for perfect spherification. She knew that Matthews was using too high a concentration, creating spheres that were structurally unsound. She knew the solution as clearly as she knew her own name. She whispered, "Reduce the calcium chloride to 0.5% and ensure your alginate bath has been refrigerated for at least 4 hours." Matthews stopped mid-motion, his whisk suspended over the failing mixture. The entire kitchen seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. He turned slowly, his expression cycling from confusion to incredulity to something that looked like offense. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the sharp edge of authority challenged. Did you just try to tell me how to cook? Marcus stepped closer, his arms crossed, a smirk playing at his lips. Maybe she watched a YouTube video, he said with a condescending chuckle. Think she knows better than a Michelin-starred chef? But deep inside, something had stirred in Alicia. Not anger. She'd learned long ago that anger was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, it was something more powerful. The quiet certainty of someone who knows their worth, regardless of whether others recognize it. She had spent years suppressing her knowledge, dimming her light to make others comfortable, but watching Matthew's struggle with a technique she had mastered years ago awakened something that had been sleeping. The kitchen returned to its frantic pace, but the energy had shifted. Matthews continued to struggle with his spherification, his movements becoming more erratic with each failure. The other chefs shot occasional glances at Alicia, some curious, others dismissive, but all of them marked by a new awareness that the quiet dishwasher had spoken with unexpected authority. Alicia returned to her station, but her mind raced. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen in New Orleans, where she'd first learned that cooking was love made visible. She remembered the day she'd received her acceptance letter to Le Cordon Bleu, how her mother had cried tears of joy and pride. She recalled her final exam, where she'd created a 7-course tasting menu that had left the French master chefs speechless, their praise flowing in rapid French that she understood perfectly. That was before life intervened, before her mother's cancer diagnosis, before the medical bills that consumed her college fund, before the decision to set aside her dreams, to work 3 jobs, and keep her family afloat. She had come to Chicago with nothing but her skills and her determination, taking whatever job she could find in the culinary world, even if it meant starting at the bottom of a kitchen where she was more qualified than most of the people giving her orders. But watching Matthews fail at something she could fix with her eyes closed reminded her of who she really was. Not just Alicia the dishwasher, invisible and ignored, but Alicia Thompson, trained chef, artist of flavor, creator of culinary magic. The woman who had once made a traditional French master chef weep over a perfect pot-au-feu. That night, as mind went, she walked home to her small apartment in Pilsen. Alicia made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't remain invisible anymore. 3 days later, the tension in Le Bernardin Modern's kitchen had reached a boiling point. Matthews still lingered over his failed molecular spherification attempts, his voice growing sharper with each botched batch. The restaurant's reputation hung in the balance as word spread through Chicago's food scene about inconsistencies in their signature dishes. "This is a disaster," Matthews hissed to Marcus during the pre-service meeting. "The spheres are breaking. The bouillabaisse tastes flat. And Pierce from the Tribune is coming back tomorrow night with the Michelin inspector. We need this dish perfect." Alicia continued her prep work at the vegetable station, but her trained ear caught every word. She knew the problem went beyond spherification. Matthew's understanding of flavor layering was fundamentally flawed. His bouillabaisse lacked the depth that came from proper rouille, the complexity that required patient building of the stock, the soul that transformed simple fish stew into something transcendent. Without thinking, she spoke. "The saffron needs to bloom in warm stock for 20 minutes before adding to the base, and the rouille should be made with roasted red peppers, not raw ones." Dead silence. 12 pairs of eyes turned to her. Matthews's face flushed crimson. "Did I ask you?" he spat, his voice rising above the usual kitchen noise. "Did anyone in this kitchen ask the dishwasher for her opinion on classical French cuisine?" Marcus stepped forward, his posture aggressive. Maybe you should stick to scrubbing pots and leave the cooking to people who actually went to culinary school. If only he knew. Alicia felt the familiar burn of words swallowed, of expertise dismissed, of intelligence insulted. But this time, something was different. She looked directly at Matthews, her brown eyes steady and unflinching. "I know what I'm talking about," she said quietly. "Oh, you know, do you?" Matthew's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Tell me, where exactly did you learn about molecular gastronomy? The McDonald's training program?" The kitchen erupted in uncomfortable laughter. Even some of the line cooks, who had always been decent to her, joined in the mockery. Alicia felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but underneath it, something harder and more determined was crystallizing. She walked away, but this time, the humiliation felt different. That wasn't just embarrassment burning in her chest. That was righteous anger finally waking up. That evening, after the dinner service ended in another series of returned dishes and customer complaints, Alicia lingered in the empty kitchen. She looked at Matthews's abandoned workstation, at the failed spherification attempts, at the flat, lifeless bouillabaisse that would never pass a Michelin inspector's standards. For the first time in 8 months, she allowed herself to really see the kitchen not as a dishwasher, but as a chef. She noticed the inefficient prep layout, the poor quality of some ingredients, the shortcuts that compromised every dish's potential. This wasn't a Michelin-starred kitchen operating at excellence. It was a kitchen coasting on reputation while slowly declining into mediocrity. Matthews had built his career on a foundation of privilege and connections, never having to prove himself the way she had. He'd never had to perfect every technique, because failure might mean losing not just a job, but a chance at a dream. He'd never had to work 3 times as hard for half the recognition, never had to smile while being treated as less than human. But Alicia had, and in that crucible of discrimination and dismissal, she had become something Matthews would never be. Truly great. The next morning, she arrived at work with a quiet resolve that felt like steel in her veins. The kitchen buzzed with nervous energy. Tonight's dinner service would make or break the restaurant's reputation. The Michelin inspector would be dining alongside food critics from 3 major publications. Matthews paced frantically, barking, orders that made no sense and changing the menu every few minutes. "I can't get the spherification right," he admitted to Marcus in a moment of panic. "The technique is too unreliable. Maybe we should switch to a different preparation." "But you've been promoting the molecular bouillabaisse for weeks," Marcus replied. "The critics are expecting it." Alicia finished her morning prep and approached Matthews's station. Her heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. "Chef, I can help you with the spherification. I know the technique." Matthews whirled around, his face already red with stress and anger. "I told you to stay out of my kitchen business. I don't need help from someone who—" He stopped himself, but the unfinished sentence hung in the air like smoke. "From someone like me," Alicia finished quietly. The kitchen fell silent. Even the dishwashers stopped their work. Everyone knew what had almost been said. The words that revealed the ugly truth beneath Matthews's dismissals. "I didn't say that," Matthews stammered, but his eyes wouldn't meet hers. "You didn't have to," Alicia replied. "But your spherification is still failing, and your reputation is still on the line. Pride won't fix that." For a moment, something flickered in Matthews's expression. Uncertainty, perhaps even recognition that he was in over his head. But then his jaw hardened and his voice turned ice-cold. "Clean the walk-in cooler," he ordered. "That's where you belong." Alicia nodded and walked away. But she had seen what she needed to see. Matthews was afraid. Not just of failing, but of being exposed as the fraud he'd always been. And fear made people dangerous. That night would change everything. In her small apartment above Rosa's Bodega on 18th Street, Alicia sat at her tiny kitchen table with a worn leather portfolio spread before her. The cover was embossed with gold. Lettering: Le Cordon Bleu Paris, Chef de Cuisine Programme, Distinction d'Excellence. The pages were filled with photographs of her culinary creations, letters of recommendation from James Beard Award winners, and her final thesis on molecular gastronomy as cultural bridge, traditional techniques in modern applications. On the cover photo, a younger Alicia stood in pristine whites beside Chef Henri Dubois, one of France's most respected culinary masters, her hands holding a plate that had earned a perfect score from all 5 examining chefs. The caption read, "Alicia Thompson, outstanding graduate, specialization in classical French and molecular techniques, summa cum laude." Back then, this was her language. She could break down the molecular structure of jellification, explain why spherification required precise pH balance, describe the way temperature affected emulsification in ways that made seasoned chefs reconsider techniques they thought they'd mastered. Her final project had been a revolutionary take on bouillabaisse that incorporated spherified saffron pearls that burst with concentrated flavor, creating an experience that honored tradition while embracing innovation. The portfolio told the story of a prodigy. At 23, she had been the youngest student in her program and the first African-American woman to graduate summa cum laude from Le Cordon Bleu Paris. Offers had poured in from restaurants across Europe and America. Thomas Keller's team had courted her. Daniel Boulud had personally called to offer her a position at Daniel. Her future had been a straight line to culinary stardom. The last time she touched this portfolio, she'd been packing to leave Paris, her dreams crumbling like an improperly tempered chocolate. The phone call had come at 3 a.m. French time. Her mother's voice, shaky and afraid. "Baby, I need you to come home. The doctors found something. Stage 3, pancreatic cancer. 6 months to live without aggressive treatment. Treatment that would cost everything her family had, and more." Alicia had closed the portfolio that day, booked a flight to Chicago, and never looked back. She never did make it to that final interview with Thomas Keller's team. She never accepted the position at Le Bernardin in New York that would have launched her career into the stratosphere. Instead, she worked 3 jobs: prep cook at a breakfast diner, weekend catering assistant, and night dishwasher at a sports bar, sending every penny home for her mother's treatment. When her mother beat the cancer, defying all odds and surviving those brutal 18 months of chemotherapy, Alicia had been too broke and too far removed from the culinary world to reclaim her place. But her mother lived. That was worth everything. The EVTO photo on the last page showed her mother at her 60th birthday party, healthy and radiant, surrounded by the extended family that Alicia's sacrifice had kept together. Her mother's eyes shone with pride and love, but also with something that looked like regret. She had begged Alicia to return to cooking, to reclaim the dreams she'd set aside. "You can't keep washing dishes forever, baby," her mother had said during their last phone call. "God gave you a gift. He didn't mean for you to hide it forever." Alicia traced her finger over a photo of the molecular bouillabaisse that had made her famous at Le Cordon Bleu. The spherified saffron caviar glistened like amber jewels against the rich, complex broth. She remembered the way Chef Dubois had closed his eyes when he tasted it, the reverent silence that fell over the examination room, the standing ovation from professors who had seen thousands of students but recognized something extraordinary. She flipped to her notes on spherification, pages of calculations, pH measurements, temperature charts, and timing protocols that she had developed through months of experimentation. The technique Matthews was butchering wasn't just something she had learned. It was something she had perfected, refined, and elevated to an art form. For 3 years, she had suppressed this knowledge, dimmed her brilliance, accepted invisibility as the price of survival. She had told herself it was temporary, just until she got back on her feet, just until she figured out how to re-enter the culinary world that had moved on without her. But watching Matthews struggle with her technique, listening to him dismiss her expertise, seeing him treat her as if she were nothing more than a pair of hands to scrub his mistakes, that had awakened something that had been sleeping too long. Alicia didn't leave culinary excellence behind when she took that dishwashing job. Culinary excellence never left her. She had just been waiting for the right moment to remind the world who she really was. But this time, she wouldn't walk away for love. She would stay and fight for respect. She opened her laptop and began typing an email that would change everything. The subject line read, "Molecular spherification. Technical consultation available." The recipient, Michelin Guide, Chicago office. In that quiet apartment, surrounded by the evidence of her excellence, Alicia Thompson made a decision. Tomorrow, they would finally see her not as the invisible dishwasher, but as the chef she had always been. The Magnificent Mile was still asleep when Alicia stepped off the red line at Grand Avenue. Dawn painted the Chicago skyline in shades of amber and rose, and the streets held that quiet promise that comes before a city fully awakens. She walked the familiar route to Le Bernardin Moderne, but today felt different, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air itself seems to hold its breath. She entered the restaurant through the staff entrance, her worn sneakers silent on the polished concrete floors. The kitchen was empty, except for the gentle hum of refrigeration units and the soft blue glow of pilot lights. For once, this space belonged entirely to her. No hesitation, she moved to Matthew's abandoned spherification station and began to work, with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of an artist. First, she prepared a proper sodium alginate bath. Not the rushed mixture Matthews had been using, but a carefully measured solution that had been refrigerated for exactly 4 hours to achieve optimal hydration. The molecular gastronomy techniques she had pioneered at Le Cordon Bleu flowed through her hands like muscle memory, awakening from a long sleep. She adjusted the calcium chloride concentration to precisely 0.5%, a ratio she had calculated through months of experimentation in Paris. Her movements were fluid, economical, each action purposeful and exact. This wasn't just cooking. This was chemistry, physics, and art unified in the service of flavor. The spherification began to take shape under her skilled hands. Tiny pearls of concentrated saffron essence, each one a perfect sphere that would burst on the tongue with the intensity of 1,000 sunsets. She created caviar from olive oil that tasted like the Mediterranean coast, pearls of lemon that captured the brightness of summer in Provence, spheres of concentrated lobster essence that held the soul of the sea. But the spherification was only the beginning. Alicia turned her attention to the bouillabaisse itself, the dish that had made her famous in culinary school. She knew that Matthew's version was a pale imitation of what this ancient Provençal stew could be. True bouillabaisse wasn't just fish soup. It was a symphony of flavors that told the story of Mediterranean fishing villages, of generations of women who transformed simple catches into something transcendent. She began with a proper fish fumet, using bones and heads that had been roasting slowly in the oven since before dawn. The rouillou came next, not the shortcut version Matthews favored, but the traditional emulsion of egg yolks, saffron, cayenne, and roasted red peppers that required patience and respect for the process. Each component was built layer by layer, flavor upon flavor, until the kitchen filled with aromas that would make the ghosts of Marseille fishermen weep with nostalgia. When she finished, Alicia looked at her creation with the critical eye of a master chef. The bouillabaisse gleamed in its copper pot, the surface dotted with islands of golden oil that caught the kitchen lights like scattered stars. The spherified garnishes sat in their calcium chloride solution, perfect spheres of concentrated flavor, ready to burst with oceanic intensity. There was nothing else to say. She had transformed Matthews's failing dish into something that honored both tradition and innovation. She quietly left the kitchen as the first morning light began to stream through the high windows, her work complete. Behind her, the evidence of her expertise sat ready to be discovered, a silent testimony to skills that had been dismissed and talents that had been ignored. At 7 a.m., Marcus arrived for the morning prep and stopped dead in his tracks. The spherification station, which had been Matthews's nightmare for weeks, now held dozens of perfect spheres suspended in crystal-clear solution. Each one was flawless, a tiny jewel of concentrated flavor that represented everything Matthews had been trying and failing to achieve. "What the hell?" he whispered, moving closer to examine the work. The bouillabaisse simmered gently on the back burner, its complex aroma immediately recognizable as something extraordinary. This wasn't the flat, lifeless version Matthews had been struggling with. This was the real thing, the kind of dish that built reputations and earned stars. Within minutes, the kitchen filled with arriving staff, all drawn by the incredible smell and the sight of perfect spherification that had seemed impossible just hours before. Word spread quickly through the restaurant. Someone had solved Matthews's problem. Someone had created the dish that could save their reputation with the Michelin inspector. "This could be our salvation," whispered one of the sous chefs, tasting the broth with reverent appreciation. "This is Restaurant of the Year quality." By 9 a.m., photos of the mysterious overnight creation had gone viral on culinary social media. Professional chefs across Chicago were sharing images of the perfect spherification, speculating about the identity of the master who had created such flawless technique. Food bloggers debated the provenance of the incredible bouillabaisse, comparing it to the legendary versions served in the finest restaurants of Marseille. But in the midst of the excitement and speculation, one question haunted everyone who saw the evidence of this overnight miracle. Who was the invisible chef who had saved Le Bernardin Moderne? The answer would shake the culinary world to its foundation. By noon, the investigation had begun in earnest. Matthews stormed through the kitchen like a man possessed, demanding answers from every staff member. The security cameras had captured a figure in dark clothing entering through the staff entrance at 5:47 a.m. But the angle made identification impossible. What the cameras did reveal was 4 hours of methodical, professional work, the movements of someone who understood not just what to do, but why each step mattered. "I want to know who did this," Matthews raged, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and desperation. "No one enters my kitchen without permission. No one touches my dishes." But even as he ranted, everyone could see the truth in his eyes. The overnight creation wasn't just good, it was transcendent. It was the kind of work that exposed the gap between competence and mastery, between cooking and artistry, and Matthews knew he could never have created it himself. They pulled the staff entry logs, cross-referencing key card access with the timeline captured on security footage. The list was short. Only 3 people had keys and knew the alarm codes. Matthews himself, Marcus, and one other name that made everyone stop and stare. "That's the dishwasher," whispered one of the line cooks, pointing at the entry log. "Alicia Thompson." "That's impossible," Marcus scoffed, but his voice lacked conviction. "She's just—" He stopped, realizing how his next words would sound. Matthews sat heavily in his office chair, the security footage frozen on his computer screen. The figure moved with unmistakable confidence, organizing the workspace with professional efficiency, working without referring to recipes or notes. This wasn't someone following instructions. This was someone who understood the science and art of cooking at a fundamental level. At 3 p.m., they called Alicia into the office. She sat across from Matthews and Marcus, her worn leather portfolio resting on the table between them like evidence in a trial. For 8 months, they had seen her as background noise, as invisible as the equipment she cleaned. Now they were forced to really look at her for the first time. "You want to know who I am?" she said quietly, her voice steady and clear. "So I'll tell you." She opened the portfolio, revealing the photographs of her culinary masterpieces, the letters from James Beard winners, the documentation of techniques that had made her a legend at Le Cordon Bleu. Matthews's face went white as he recognized his own spherification technique, the one he'd been struggling with for weeks, perfected in photographs dated 3 years earlier. "Summa cum laude from Le Cordon Bleu Paris," she continued, her tone matter-of-fact rather than boastful. "Specialization in molecular gastronomy and classical French technique. I developed the spherification method you've been trying to copy. I created the bouillabaisse recipe that's going viral on culinary social media right now." Marcus leaned forward, studying a photograph of young Alicia with Chef Henri Dubois. "This is real?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thomas, Keller wanted to hire me straight out of school," Alicia replied. "Daniel Boulud called me personally. I had offers from restaurants across 2 continents. She turned the page, revealing more accolades, more recognition, more proof of excellence that had been invisible to them because they had never bothered to look. "Then why?" Matthews started to ask, then stopped, realizing how the question would sound. "Why am I washing your dishes?" Alicia finished. "Because my mother was dying, and family comes before careers. Because sometimes we sacrifice our dreams to save the people we love. Because I spent 3 years working every job I could find to pay for cancer treatment and keep my family together." The room fell silent, except for the distant sounds of kitchen prep. Matthews stared at the portfolio as if it were written in a foreign language, trying to reconcile the evidence before him with the assumptions he'd carried for 8 months. "I didn't leave culinary excellence behind when I took this job," Alicia continued. "Culinary excellence never left me. I just had to walk away from the spotlight for love. But every day, I watched you struggle with techniques I mastered years ago. Every day, I heard you dismiss my expertise because you couldn't see past what I looked like or where I was standing in your kitchen." She pointed to a photograph of the molecular bouillabaisse that had made her famous. "This dish, the one that's saving your reputation today, I created it when I was 23. I've been perfecting it for 5 years while you've been taking credit for work you couldn't understand." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Matthews looked smaller somehow, diminished by the revelation that the person he had dismissed as just the dishwasher possessed skills that surpassed his own. Marcus couldn't meet her eyes, his previous condescension now revealed as ignorant arrogance. In that quiet office, surrounded by documentation of her excellence, they finally saw Alicia Thompson not as the invisible woman who cleaned their mistakes, but as the master chef she had always been, one whose grace under dismissal had revealed more about their character than their own actions ever could. The next morning, Alicia stepped into Le Bernardin Modern's kitchen like always, but the atmosphere had transformed completely. The usual cacophony of prep work ceased as she entered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Knives paused over cutting boards. Then, like a wave building from silence, applause began. It started with Maria from the pastry station, her weathered hands clapping slowly, deliberately. Then Carlos from the garde-manger joined in, followed by the entire prep crew. Soon, the kitchen thundered with appreciation, a standing ovation from people who understood that they had been working alongside greatness without ever knowing it. "Chef Thompson," said James, one of the line cooks, using her proper title for the first time. "Thank you for showing us what real technique looks like." Maria approached with tears in her eyes. "Mija, I've been cooking for 30 years, and what you created yesterday? That was art. Pure art." The overnight success of her bouillabaisse had rippled through Chicago's culinary scene like wildfire. Food critics who had tasted the dish during the previous evening service were calling it transcendent, revolutionary, and the most perfect fusion of tradition and innovation in recent memory. The Michelin inspector had been so impressed that rumors swirled about an unprecedented third star being awarded to Le Bernardin Moderne. But Matthews was nowhere to be found. Word had spread quickly through the industry about the true identity of the kitchen's secret weapon. By morning, 3 major food publications had called requesting interviews with the mystery chef who saved Le Bernardin Moderne. Social media exploded with the story of the brilliant culinary school graduate who had been washing dishes while possessing skills that surpassed most executive chefs. Later that day, restaurant owner Victor Castillo called an emergency staff meeting. A distinguished man in his 60s who had built his reputation on recognizing and nurturing talent, Castillo looked both embarrassed and determined as he addressed the assembled kitchen staff. "What happened in this kitchen was unacceptable," he began, his voice carrying the weight of authority and regret. "We employed one of the most talented chefs in America and relegated her to washing dishes. That ends today." He turned to Alicia, who stood quietly at the back of the group. "Chef Thompson, I owe you an apology that no words can adequately express. Your treatment here was a failure of leadership, vision, and basic human decency. I'm offering you the position of executive chef, effective immediately." The kitchen erupted in cheers and applause, but Alicia raised her hand for silence. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had found her power. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Castillo, but I have conditions. First, Gregory Matthews is no longer welcome in this kitchen. His dismissal of talent based on prejudice has no place in a professional environment. Second, I want complete menu control and the authority to restructure this kitchen according to proper standards of excellence and respect." Castillo nodded without hesitation. "Done? Anything else?" "A scholarship program," Alicia continued, "for young chefs from underrepresented communities who have the passion and skill but lack the financial resources to attend culinary school. This kitchen will become a place where talent is recognized regardless of zip code, skin color, or family. Income." "Brilliant," Castillo agreed. "The Alicia Thompson Culinary Scholarship will be established immediately." 2 weeks later, Alicia stood before a packed auditorium at the Chicago Culinary Institute. She had been invited to give the keynote address at their graduation ceremony, where 50 young chefs were about to receive their diplomas. Under one condition: she would speak from the heart about overlooked talent and the responsibility to lift others up. She stepped up to the podium and looked out at the sea of eager faces. young people from every background imaginable, all united by their passion for culinary excellence. In the front row sat her mother, tears of pride streaming down her face. The same woman whose battle with cancer had redirected Alicia's path, but never diminished her dreams. "Look around this room," Alicia began, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the auditorium. "Some of you will go on to work in kitchens, where you'll be immediately recognized for your talent. Others will find themselves washing dishes, prepping vegetables, or working in positions where your skills are overlooked or dismissed." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I want you to remember this moment, when you encounter someone whose talent is hidden beneath circumstance. The person washing dishes beside you might be the most gifted chef you'll ever meet. The prep cook whose suggestions you dismiss might understand flavor better than you ever will." The entire room stood in thunderous applause. But Alicia wasn't finished. Excellence has no color, no gender, no zip code. It lives in the hands that refuse to give up, in the hearts that keep creating even when no one is watching. Your job as chefs is not just to cook. It's to recognize greatness wherever it hides and help it shine. 6 months later, Le Bernardin Moderne had transformed completely under Alicia's leadership. The molecular bouillabaisse that had saved. The restaurant's reputation was now featured in culinary textbooks as an example of perfect technique. More importantly, the kitchen had become a training ground for young chefs from underrepresented communities, with 12 scholarship recipients learning alongside seasoned professionals. Marcus had stayed, humbled by the experience and eager to learn from someone whose skills far exceeded his own. He often told new staff members about the day he learned that expertise doesn't come with a pedigree. It comes with passion, practice, and perseverance. Matthews had quietly left Chicago, his reputation in tatters after word spread about how he had treated his most talented employee. The industry had a long memory for those who let prejudice blind them to excellence. Alicia still arrived early and stayed late, but now she moved through the kitchen as its rightful leader. The same hands that had once scrubbed dishes now guided young chefs through complex techniques, teaching them not just how to cook, but how to see and respect the talent in everyone around them. The Alicia Thompson Culinary Scholarship had received funding from restaurants across the country, all eager to invest in a program that sought out overlooked talent. Food Network had commissioned a documentary about her journey, and her cookbook, Hidden Excellence, Recognizing Greatness in Unexpected Places, had become a bestseller. But perhaps most importantly, Alicia had proven that excellence cannot be hidden forever. Like a perfectly executed spherification, truth has a way of rising to the surface, bursting with concentrated power that transforms everything it touches. Her mother called every Sunday, their conversations filled with updates about the restaurant, the scholarship recipients, and the young chefs whose lives were being changed by having their talents recognized and nurtured. "I'm proud of you, baby," her mother would say, "not just for what you achieved, but for how you lifted others up with you." That was Alicia's greatest accomplishment. Not the Michelin stars or the media attention, but the knowledge that she had used her moment of recognition to ensure that other talented people wouldn't have to wait as long as she did to be seen. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with your success is make sure others don't have to struggle in silence the way you did.